done by the medical officer. So we have three types of COVID patient: mild, moderate, severe, and in the severe category we have one critically ill category also. So mild patient mean they have the symptom that is restricted to the upper respiratory tract, that is sneezing, running nose, sore throat, headache, or anosmia, like that. They may or may not have fever. Definitely they will not complain of shortness of breath, and their oxygen level would be above 94%. And this category of patient, the mild disease and asymptomatic disease, where you confirm the diagnosis only by lab investigation, which you have done due to contact tracing or due to some other purpose. So these two category of patient, if they fulfill the criteria laid down by the government of India, you should isolate them at home. And you should monitor their health continue regularly also. That's very important. You have to pick up the red flag signs so that you can ship the patient to the nearby hospital at the earliest without any delay. Then you have the moderate disease, anyone of either respiratory rate which is more than 24, patient complaining of breathlessness, and the saturation is varying between 90 to 93% on room air. So any one of them present, so you can clinically assign the patient as having moderate disease. And then severe disease, where the respiratory rate is gone above 30, patient breathlessness, and patient oxygen saturation has fallen further. It is now less than 90% on room air. And out amongst the severe category, those patients who are having ARDS or severe sepsis or multi-organ dysfunction, we call them critically ill patient. So as I've told you already, we have three armamentarium which really reduce the mortality in COVID patient, that is steroid, or the low molecular weight heparin, or oxygen therapy. So far the antivirals are concerned, they don't have any impact on the mortality. One antiviral, remdesivir, they can reduce the duration of hospital stay. And regarding the favipiravir, many people are using. Let me tell you, it is not in the national guideline. And please don't use that favipiravir. Don't use favipiravir. There is no very little evidence for that, and it is not in the national guideline. So from now onward, I hope none of you will use favipiravir in any one of your patients. So if you want to use antiviral, we have two options. One, remdesivir, and second, ivermectin. And then we have few more drugs that are under the government. They have applied for government permission. And maybe in near future, we'll have two more drugs, like one antibody cocktail and another antiviral drugs. Yeah.
और बीच में चल पड़ी है,
कोई वीडियो चल रहा है, मुझे
YouTube का वीडियो चल पड़ा है। देखो ना, ये बीच में कैसे चल पड़ा। YouTube चल पड़ा है आगे आगे। जो किसी से
इसको थोड़ा बड़ा कर लो,
इसको एडजस्ट करो ना, इसको बंद करो। एक्चुअली YouTube पे या तो somebody has clicked it, जो नेक्स्ट वीडियो अपने आप चल पड़ा। पॉज ही करके रखो ना, पॉज कर दो इसे, वॉल्यूम पॉज कर दो। हां पॉज करो, ये तो बहुत चल पड़ा। बीच से इसको बंद करो, पॉज करने को ही नहीं है, कर दो बंद करो। ऐसे सारा डिस्टर्ब हो रहा है।
चलो
इसी स्लाइड से कर रहा हूँ करंट से
Okay. 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 So coming to the steroid dose, as I've told you, it has mortality benefit, but you have to use only in hypoxemic patients who are hospitalized. There are two steroids which are particularly recommended. One is IV methylprednisolone and second is dexamethasone. The dosing schedule for moderate disease are like that. IV methylprednisolone 0.5 to 1 mg per kg. And if it comes 32 mg, then make it 16 mg twice a day in divided doses. Whereas dexamethasone is a very long half-life, you should give it only once a day dose. So this is the dosing schedule. However, let me remind you, always use the lower dose first, rather than going to a higher dose from the beginning. And secondly, try to use it for a shorter duration if there is no indication for prolonging it beyond 5 days or 10 days. Remember, sometimes you may put the patient on IV steroid. In that case, once the patient is stable, you should try to switch over to oral steroid as early as possible, which will decrease the burden of the nursing care. Sometimes it may happen that you have used a lower dose of steroid, but the patient condition is deteriorating, and somebody may ask, should we increase the dose of the steroid? The answer is no, because we don't have any evidence which is suggesting that escalating dose of steroid will have beneficial effect on the part of the patient. So coming to oxygen therapy, the target SpO2 is 92 to 96%. However, initially when the oxygen level is low, first we should achieve a target of more than 90%, and later on, when the patient is stable, then we should achieve a target of 92 to 96%. And there are evidences available. If you go below 92 or if you go above 96, there is chance of increased mortality. It may be harmful also. So don't try to achieve an oxygen level in moderate patient between 92 to 96%, beyond that, right? But in a COPD patient, you know, oxygen can cause hypercapnia in a COPD patient, even in other chronic lung disease patient like patient having kyphoscoliosis or patient having chronic asthma or obesity hypoventilation syndrome. In this category of patient, you should be very conservative. So our goal in this category of patient, particularly COPD, is 88 to 92%. Otherwise, there may be oxygen-induced hypercapnia and patient may land into confusional state also. So this is the goal of oxygen therapy in moderate patients. Now coming to the low molecular weight heparin. Low molecular weight heparin, all hospitalized patients, you should use low molecular weight heparin or unfractionated heparin. The dosing schedule is based on per kg body weight. So enoxaparin dose would be 0.5 mg per kg per day, and you have to use it subcutaneously. But you have to check that there is no contraindication or there is no high risk for bleeding present in your patient. If the patient weight is 80 kilo, the dose will come around 40. देखना भाई जा नहीं रहा है. Okay, नहीं. Okay, so this is the dosing schedule of steroid in severe COVID patient. The dose is different than the moderate disease. You can see it here. IV methylprednisolone in severe COVID patient should be given 1 to 2 mg per kg, not the 0.5 to 1 mg, which our guideline advocating for the moderate patient. And the dose of dexamethasone is again also high to 0.2 to 0.4 mg per kg body weight. So the conventional anticoagulant dose in severe COVID patient is different than the moderate COVID patient. In the moderate, we are advocating 0.5 mg per kg once a day, enoxaparin, whereas in the severe COVID patient, the guideline is advocating twice a day dose. So this is important. there is no role of therapeutic anticoagulation in the present moment. After considering all the evidences available, there is no point going into the therapeutic anticoagulant dose as a prophylactic purpose. Therapeutic dose, we mean 1 mg per kg, but that you should use only when there is a confirmed thrombosis. But just not for the sake of prophylaxis, there is no point using a therapeutic dose. So that point I want to emphasize here. Now, there are certain investigations that you must advise in a hospitalized patient routinely at the baseline, and some investigation you have to repeat later, like 24 to 48 hours gap. Complete hemogram is very important. You know, in complete hemogram, you may find leukopenia, lymphopenia, which is carrying a poor prognostic marker. There can be thrombocytopenia also in COVID patient, but unlike other viral infection or sepsis, the thrombocytopenia is never very significant. It is usually mild thrombocytopenia, varying from 1 lakh to 1,50,000 or sometimes just below 1 lakh. Then basic metabolic profile you have to advise, including LFT and RFT, because COVID can cause hepatitis, COVID transaminitis, or COVID can also cause acute kidney injury. Inflammatory parameter is very important, particularly in the second phase of the disease, which starts after 7 to 10 days, when the inflammation begins to increase in our body. And so these are the inflammatory markers that you should advise, like quantitative CRP, ferritin, D-dimer, IL-6, and LDH. Let me tell you, IL-6 level you should advise only when it is available, and you will get the report within a day. But if it is not available, or the lab is sending the IL-6 testing to outside, and the report will come after 3 to 4 days, please don't do it, advise IL-6 in that case. Our job can be done with CRP also. Arterial blood gas should be measured in a hypoxemic patient for two purposes: to know the arterial acid-base imbalance that your patient having, and to know the PaO2 FiO2 ratio, which we call PF ratio. That is very important to categorize the degree of severity of hypoxemia, particularly critically ill patient having ARDS, and to categorize the type of ARDS. When you are suspecting some abnormal cardiac injury there, you may advise ECG and cardiac biomarker like troponin also. When your patient having sepsis, you may advise blood culture and other culture as advocated by the sepsis guideline. There is nothing special for COVID sepsis. It is the same sepsis guideline we have to use here. And there are certain investigations that depends on the underlying comorbidity. For example, if your patient having left heart failure, and then you may advise echocardiography in that case. So radiological investigation, there are lots of unnecessary overuse of CT scan. That's not recommended scientifically and clinically. That should not be the case. Every patient getting CT just like X-ray, after 4 days another CT to see the spread of disease, that's really clinically not indicated. We should be scientific in our approach. Home isolated patient, I will not recommend any radiological investigation unless there is some deterioration where you have to ship the patient to hospital, not for CT scan. Chest X-ray you should ideally get in all hospitalized patients at the baseline, and if there is worsening of patient condition, you may advise it later on also. CT scan, be very, very selective. Otherwise, in the future, we will have a tsunami of lung cancer the way we are advising CT scan to our patient, and we are repeating it so frequently. So there are 4 indications where you should advise CT scan: where you are suspecting the patient having COVID, but the patient RT-PCR is negative. You know, RT-PCR sensitivity is 70%, and with the COVID variant, the sensitivity exactly maybe little bit lower, which we don't have evidence at the present moment. However, if your clinical suspicion for COVID is very high, RT-PCR negative, go for CT. And CT, if you get the typical picture of bilateral subpleural ground glass opacity and the Coret score is 4 or 5, then the chance of dealing with COVID is very high. And in our state guideline, we are advising that whenever your patient, you are suspecting COVID, but your patient RT-PCR report is getting delayed over a period of 3 to 4 days, please start antiviral for the home isolated patient. Don't delay it. Next, you are suspecting some other diagnosis. In the COVID time, we are thinking all cases of fever is because of COVID. That's not true. There are other diagnoses which we should also rule out. For example, a patient having upper lobe lesion, fever 1 month, we should suspect also tuberculosis and we should rule it out. And if sputum examination normal, then you should go for CT. Now, in a COVID confirmed patient, if the patient having the hemodynamic deterioration all on a sudden, there is a sudden fall in saturation not being maintained, you should suspect pulmonary embolism, which is common in COVID patient, and go for CTPA, pulmonary angiography. Now, post-COVID patient, if the patient not maintaining oxygen therapy, oxygen level, and you are suspecting post-COVID interstitial fibrosis, you have to get CT for that. So these are the 4 basic areas where there is a scope for advising CT, and you should be selective in your approach so far CT scan is concerned. If you get a CT abnormality in a COVID positive patient where the oxygen level is being maintained, there is no CT will not decide the treatment. Let me tell you at the present moment, we don't have any guideline, any evidence which is suggesting that COVID patient saturation normal, but CT is abnormal, you should start remdesivir in this patient. There is no guideline, so please follow the guideline religiously. Yeah, so initial management, close monitoring is very important. Let me tell you that those patients having COVID pneumonia, the disease can progress rapidly, like a wildfire, I can say. So you have to very aggressive in monitoring the patient. If the patient is admitted today, we have to monitor frequently. If the patient is on oxygen therapy, to detect the early deterioration so that you can take necessary measures at the earliest. So you have to measure the vitals frequently to detect any hemodynamic instability at the earliest. You have to measure the saturation level also for any respiratory deterioration. Now, it has been a common practice to advise IV antibiotic to all patients admitted in the ward or in the ICU. And there is no scientific basis for that. We are unnecessarily putting burden on the exchequer by advising antibiotics unnecessarily. It will cause lots of drug resistance in the future, and it will cause antibiotic associated side effects. So one clear point I want to highlight here, don't advise antibiotics. COVID does not mean you have to give concomitant antibiotics, right? We are using doxycycline along with ivermectin not as an antibiotic, but as an anti-inflammatory, and studies have shown there is synergistic action if you combine both the drugs. So please be selective in using antibiotics until unless there is clear evidence of bacterial infection. Please don't use antibiotic. And this is evidence-based medicine that we all have to follow religiously. Now, symptomatic management of fever with antipyretic. If there is a dry cough, mostly patient having dry cough, you can use antitussive. Like we have 2 antitussive like dextromethorphan, like levodopa. You can use 10 ml TDS. Antipyretic paracetamol, you can use 650 mg. Maximum dose you can go is 4 times a day, 4 hours, 6 hourly, or 4 times a day. You cannot go beyond that. Now, if your patient fever is not responding despite on paracetamol 650 mg 4 times a day, use naproxen. Naproxen is a very potent anti-inflammatory, and the dose is 250 mg twice a day. Maintain euvolumia, that is very important. That euvolumia, I mean intake is output plus 500 ml. So you maintain euvolumia in your patient. So target oxygen therapy, I have already talked about. Now coming to oxygen devices, we have different type of devices like low flow nasal cannula, simple face mask, venti mask, non-rebreathing mask, which is available in all the DCH, high flow nasal cannula available in the DCH like IGMC, Tanda, and Mandi. Non-invasive ventilation, ideally you should use helmet, but it's not available in our state, so by face mask. And invasive ventilation, wherever required, you should not delay intubating the patient. So nasal cannula, the set flow rate is 1 to 6 liters per minute. If your patient needs flow rate above 6 liters or FiO2 above 44, then you can't use nasal cannula, right? Remember, for every 1 liter of the nasal cannula flow will increase the FiO2 by 4%. For example, if you are giving 4 liter into 416 and the atmospheric oxygen is 21, so the total FiO2 will become 37%. So this is simple math which we should remember. So this is the different nasal cannula flow and the corresponding FiO2. 1 liter 24, as I've told you, every liter will increase by 4%. So 2 liter 28, similarly 6 liter will become 44%. So if your patient needs FiO2 beyond 44, you can't use this device. Next, we have simple face mask, but here you must keep the flow above 4 liter because otherwise there would be rebreathing of carbon dioxide by the patient. So to flush out the carbon dioxide that is accumulating within the face mask, your face mask flow must be kept at a minimal of 5 liter. That's very important. Here you can deliver FiO2 of 40 to 60%. There is a patient open complaint of claustrophobia, particularly those patients who are very tachypneic. And the flow rate here varying from 6 to 10 liter. Then the device which we are using in all the DCH, that is non-rebreathing face mask. Remember, it is not a high flow device. It is a low flow device, but with this device, you can achieve a very high FiO2. Now you see there is a reservoir bag. And let me tell you, even at the DCHC level, you should keep these oxygen device in the DCHC also. And that's recommended. So reservoir bag having a capacity of 1 liter capacity. The flow rate here varying from 6 to 15%. And the FiO2 is also, you can deliver very high. There is an inspirative valve here. And there is an expirative valve here. During inspiration, this valve opens and the patient gets oxygen from the bag and the expirative valve is closed. And during expiration, the expirative valve is open and inspirative valve is closed so that the patient expirative air does not enter into the reservoir bag. So it is a it's a device that can deliver very high concentration of FiO2, and this device is highly recommended in the DCH level, but you should not start from the beginning with a non-rebreathing mask. There are certain criteria which I'm going to tell you in the next few slides. So high flow nasal cannula, here the flow rate varying from 5 to 60 liter, and initially you should start with a 20 to 35 liter. Here we use humidifier because you can understand the flow rate is so high. So humidifier is must with this device. You can increase the flow rate at an increment of 5 to 10 liter per minute. You should switch over to conventional nasal cannula once the FiO2 reaches less than 50% and the flow requirement is less than 20 liter. Please switch over to the nasal cannula because we have to save oxygen, and oxygen system is really under strain, overstretched. So if the patient not responding to the non-ventilatory oxygen devices, so far I talked about, you should switch over to ventilatory oxygen device, and we have NIV and we have invasive ventilation. With the NIV, a recommendation is use helmet, but if it is not available, then you can use total face mask. Because with helmet, there is less chance of aerosolization. Now, let me tell you one point clear. All oxygen devices, they can disperse the aerosol particle laden with the virus particle, and the dispersion rate varies with the flow rate. You can see with the nasal cannula, when you are using 3 liter flow, the dispersion is 36 centimeter. With a simple face mask, 8 liter flow mean 30 centimeter dispersion length distance. High flow nasal cannula, when you are using 60 liter and patient is coughing, the dispersion can be 290 centimeter. So one important point, please remember, when you are using high flow nasal cannula, please use a surgical mask over the high flow nasal cannula onto the face of the patient so that you can reduce the dispersion rate of the aerosol. So this is a very important review article published in the Chest Journal. If your patient having oxygen saturation less than 92 to 94% on room air and or declining SpO2 and patient not having any respiratory distress, you first start with a oxygen delivery device, that is nasal cannula, at a 4 to 6 liter per minute. But if the patient oxygenation SpO2 level worsening despite on nasal cannula 4 to 6 liter per minute, then you should go for non-rebreathing face mask 15 liter per minute. So this, you should follow this algorithm. This is important in a state when we have our oxygen system already overstretched. So be rational in your approach. Start with a patient not having any respiratory distress, only the oxygen saturation is less than 92%. You should use nasal cannula first, and if the patient oxygen saturation despite on nasal cannula worsening, you should go for non-rebreathing face mask 15 liter per minute. That's important. So, next patient is the patient who is having mild to moderate respiratory distress, right? Here the PF ratio, I told you, you need to do ABG to measure the PO2 FiO2 ratio, and the PF ratio varying from 150 to 300, and the oxygen saturation is fallen below 90% on non-rebreathing face mask. And you can see the patient using the accessory muscle of respiration, and patient breathing is levered, hemodynamically patient is stable. Then what you will do, you can use either one of the following modalities. Transfer the patient to a continuously monitored setting, observe patient closely, you should obtain ABG. So here I want to highlight observation and monitoring is important. One time monitoring of the patient does not will serve the purpose, and the patient will deteriorate in between. So our frequency of monitoring must increase in this category of patient who are having labor breathing, whose PF ratio is 150 to 300, saturation is less than 90, despite on non-rebreathing mask. So you have these three modalities that you can use. First preferred modality is the high flow nasal cannula. As I've told you, it's available only at the DCH level. Next, all the patients, you should also combine this high flow along with awake prone positioning. Awake prone positioning will improve the oxygen level, but there are certain contraindication, like patient having unstable spine fracture, patient having active hemoptysis, patient having abdominal compartment syndrome, first trimester pregnancy, or you have put a chest tube anteriorly, then you should not do awake proning. I will go into details about this. Then you have the non-invasive ventilation. I have already told you, use helmet, and particular two situations where I'm advocating non-invasive ventilation: COPD patient who are having moderate hypercapnia, or patient having cardiogenic pulmonary edema, and patient. So in this group of patient, you should use non-invasive ventilation. So this is the step 2. Next. Step 3 patient having severe respiratory distress, the PF ratio has fallen further less than 150. The SpO2 PO2 ratio is less than 196. Patient is hemodynamically unstable at this moment, and patient is you find that the patient risk of impending respiratory arrest is very much there. So please don't wait, don't delay intubation unless the patient or the attendant say do not intubation. Please intubate the patient at the earliest, otherwise patient will land into cardiorespiratory arrest, and then it will be difficult to revive the patient. Please mute yourself. It's difficult to present. Mute yourself, please. So now, in the what this is the schedule which I have already told you. Whenever you are giving oxygen supplementation to your patient, please also use the awake proning position. That is very, very important. So now coming to pharmacotherapy, we have antivirals, we have anti-inflammatory, anticoagulants, and few supplements. So let me take it up one by one. Antiviral, we have various modalities available in our country, and few would be available very soon. Like we have remdesivir, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, favipiravir. This drug is not recommended at this moment by the national guideline. So please don't advise favipiravir. Then we have convalescent plasma, lopinavir, ritonavir. It is out of the guideline because all the studies are negative trial. Molnupiravir. It is under recommendation category in our country. And then we have two cocktails of antibodies which may be available in very soon. These two cocktail antibodies, so they are all antiviral. So coming to the first drug, that is remdesivir, because there is lots of hype about this drug. Let me tell you, this drug is not a panacea. It does not have any impact on mortality. The drug you can describe best is below, if something is there. It's not optimal, but you will get something by using this drug. So don't advise remdesivir right and left without fulfilling the national guideline. So that is important point I want to give you here. So this drug basically, once the virus entered inside the cell, the virus uses the body machinery like body ATP. So this remdesivir, it competes with the endogenous ATP, and then it gets incorporated into the viral RNA, and that leads to premature chain transmission of the RNA chain formation of the virus. So that is how this drug is active. Now, the dosing schedule is very important. This drug should be given 200 mg loading dose on day 1, followed by 100 mg once daily intravenously for next 2 to 4 days, total 5 days course. Extended use, well, we don't have any study which has shown that if you use it for 10 days, you will get beneficial effects. But the CDC recommending that on day 5, if you are not getting substantial benefit, you may extend it up to 10 days. Or patients who are on mechanical ventilation and ECMO, you may extend it up to 10 days. However, there is very less evidence regarding that. It's a lyophilized drug. First, you have to reconstitute with the solution, and then you dilute it with 0.9% sodium chloride, and then you infuse it over a period of 30 to 120 minutes. Now, why we have chosen 30 to 120 minutes? If you look at this study, what you can see, remdesivir 75 mg 30-minute infusion and remdesivir 75 mg 2-hour infusion. You see area under the concentration curve is significantly higher when you are using the drug for 30-minute infusion. And that's why the recommendation is to give it shortest period of 30 minutes. Now, this is the trial which was the backbone of all our national guideline. That is the ACTT1 trial. It's a multi-centric study. They recruited COVID patients who are having radiographic infiltrate or clinical assessment or patient requiring mechanical ventilation and supplemental oxygen. The dose here, they have used the same dosing, but for a duration of 10 days. And the primary outcome was time to recovery. So what they have found, they have found significant benefits in terms of reducing the duration of hospitalization. What you can see, remdesivir, the duration of hospitalization is 10 days compared to 15 days with placebo therapy. There is also a trend towards improvement in mortality, but it is not statistically significant. So only one benefit that you will get with remdesivir therapy is decrease in the hospitalization, no benefits on mortality. So just so the primary endpoint of this study was achieved in this trial, that is 50% faster time of clinical improvement from 15 days to 10 days. It is statistically significant. 8 less days receiving oxygen, lower progression to non-invasive and invasive ventilation. That is very important. You can reduce the progression to severe disease, and better response if you give it within 10 days of symptom onset. That is important. If a patient coming after 12 days of symptom onset, please don't use remdesivir. So what you can see in this forest plot, only if this line, horizontal line, touches this vertical line, then that means it is not significant. Patient not receiving oxygen, no significant impact of remdesivir. Patient receiving high flow oxygen or non-invasive mechanical ventilation, no significant on hospitalization. Patient receiving ECMO or mechanical ventilation, it is not significant. But in only one condition, it is significant, where patient is receiving low flow oxygen. So this remdesivir drug, it is active only in patient, moderate category of patient who needs low supplementation of oxygen by nasal cannulas, NRM or face mask. But if the patient oxygen supplementation is very high, like patient is on high flow nasal cannula, then the chance of getting benefit is very less. So there are certain contraindications like hypersensitivity to any component of remdesivir. You have to be cautious in using it when the transaminitis is more than 5 times the upper limit of normal, or patient having stage 4 severe chronic kidney disease and or dialysis, eGFR is less than 30. There is an important side effect which has been reported in by many case report, severe bradycardia or hypotension. So after using remdesivir, you should watch the patient for the development of any bradycardia or hypotension. That's the point I want to emphasize here. So this is a few case report. Patient developed sinus bradycardia after using remdesivir. And you see 31% patient remdesivir, after remdesivir develop bradycardia. That's not, this is post-marketing surveillance, so it's significant, 31%. So there is a concern, should we use it in patient having eGFR less than 30? My answer is yes, because this drug contains the drug carrier cyclodextrin, and cyclodextrin, the toxic level is 250 mg per kg, and we don't achieve this level because 100 mg remdesivir contains only 6 grams cyclodextrin. So you can use remdesivir in patient eGFR less than 30, if particularly when the patient is on dialysis. So remdesivir at home, don't procure and don't administer remdesivir at home, because this drug should be given only in hospitalized condition. Now there are certain misconceptions, so this thing will clear it. A COVID-19 patient has prolonged fever beyond 6 days. His saturation is normal. Should he use remdesivir? People are using. That's not scientific. You should not use remdesivir. Remdesivir only when the saturation is less than 94%. A COVID patient requiring oxygen at home, will you start remdesivir at home? Answer is no. Remdesivir can produce side effects, and there are certain blood levels that you must measure. So do it only at home, at hospital, not at home. A patient having severe COVID-19 continues to have fever on day 13. Will you use remdesivir? Answer is no. The benefits you will get only in the initial 10 days. COVID-19 patient having fever and high inflammatory marker, but normal saturation, will you use remdesivir? Answer is no. Only hypoxemic patient will show response to remdesivir. COVID patient admitted with shortness of breath, as SpO2 is normal, CT severity score is 16. Will you use remdesivir? Answer again is no, because the study has not included CT criteria for deciding the impact of remdesivir. So please don't use remdesivir based on CT criteria of severity when the patient oxygen level is normal. Now coming to steroid, These are the different type. You see the anti-inflammatory potency is maximum with dexamethasone followed by methylprednisolone and prednisolone. You see that dexamethasone half-life is very long, so please don't use it twice a day, thrice a day, higher dose, use it once a day. Methylprednisolone 12 to 36 hour half-life, so duration of action, sorry. So you can use 16 mg BID dose. So this is one point I want to highlight here. Now, this is the dexamethasone trial. I need to talk about this trial because then it will be clear which category of patient you should use steroid. So this trial has shown there is a mortality benefit compared to usual care. And you see there overall, there is a 17% reduction in mortality. Those patients who are in invasive mechanical ventilation, there is 36% reduction in mortality. Those patients who are on oxygen therapy, there is 18% reduction in mortality, but no mortality reduction in patients who are not on any respiratory support, either oxygen or NIV. So the point I want to highlight here, don't use steroid in a patient whose oxygen level is normal, whatever be the CT score. But you should use it only when the oxygen level is low or patient is on invasive mechanical ventilation. Definitely oxygen would be low in that case. Maximum benefit you will get in patients who are on invasive mechanical ventilation. So no use of steroid in a non-normoxic patient. That's the point I want to highlight here. So even studies have shown that those patients like rheumatological patient, rheumatoid arthritis patient who are on steroid therapy, their chance of hospitalization increases significantly. So that's why don't use steroid to a patient who are not having any hypoxemia. You won't get any benefits, you will get only side effects. Tocilizumab is another drug which is overused in our setup, so and is very costly drug. We should be very careful in choosing tocilizumab in our patient. So it is a IL-6 receptor antagonist. So the drug will bind with the IL-6 receptor. So it will prevent IL-6 molecule to bind with the receptor. So further signal transduction would be blocked. So there are two drugs available, either IL-6 receptor monoclonal antibody, we have tocilizumab in our country, or anti-IL-6 monoclonal antibody, ciltuximab. We have tocilizumab, which is quite costly, more than 30,000, I feel. So your choice should be based on evidence. So what is the national guideline saying? All this use is off-label use. First point you can see here, all the criteria must be fulfilled. The presence of severe disease, that means the patient is admitted in the ICU or HDU, preferably within 24 to 48 hours of onset of severe disease or ICU admission. So if a patient of severe disease admitted in the ICU, preferably use it within 24 to 48 hours. This is one criteria. The second criteria must also be fulfilled. Significantly high inflammatory marker like CRP. In our country, IL-6 may not be available everywhere. So CRP is a good marker. No improvement despite using steroid. So first you have to use steroid. Don't start tocilizumab first. You first use steroid, no response, then you can go for tocilizumab. Please rule out active bacterial fungal TB infection. And in our country, this last line is more important. So dosing, don't use 2 doses. People are using 2 doses, guideline not recommending. There is no evidence for that. Use 4 to 6 mg per kg. Maximum you can go 800 mg, 100 ml normal saline over 1 hour. So tocilizumab, CDC is saying you should combine with steroid. As I have told you, recently hospitalized patient within the first 3 days of admission into the hospital, and preferably within 24 hours of ICU admission, and the patient is on invasive mechanical ventilation, NIV, high flow nasal cannula. If the patient is admitted in ICU but not on NIV and high flow nasal cannula, then you have to use the marker CRP more than 75 mg per liter is considered significant in this particular aspect. So what you can see here, patient must be having severe disease, patient must have progression rapidly despite on steroid, and their inflammatory marker are high. So these are the 3 categories. Always rule, if the patient is on other immunocompromised condition, suppressive therapy, you should be careful using tocilizumab. In transaminitis, more than 5 times is a risk factor. Uncontrolled serious bacterial, fungal, or non-COVID viral infection, don't use tocilizumab. Absolute neutrophil count less than 500, platelet less than 50,000. Don't use tocilizumab in this category. This is the CDC recommendation. So tocilizumab should only be given along with dexamethasone or equivalent steroid. There is a mortality benefit in the study. There are insufficient data to indicate which patient would benefit from an additional dose of tocilizumab. I mean beyond one dose, so please don't use it. There is no evidence. You may use prophylactic ivermectin when the patient is from strongyloidosis endemic areas. But I think our state is not that area, so we don't have to use this. So dose I have mentioned, this 8 mg per kg, maximum 800. Post tocilizumab, please monitor the patient for any secondary infection and neutropenia. That is important. And this is the rationale, modest mortality benefit in certain patient category, which I have discussed in details. Anticoagulation, the frequency of overall VT is 14.1%, and in the ICU setting, it is high, 22.7%. There is no evidence that based on D-dimer, you can change the dosing schedule. There is no evidence at present. Only use the dosing schedule I have mentioned earlier, prophylactic dosing schedule, no role of therapeutic anticoagulation until unless you are confirmed your patient having a diagnosed case of thromboembolism. So it has also got mortality benefit when the sepsis-induced coagulopathy score is more than 4. There is definite mortality benefit in this category of patient, or those patients who is having D-dimer more than 6 times the upper limit of normal. There is mortality benefit. So you can use this scoring system also to find out which is the category of patient where you will get mortality benefit. So there are certain non-specific therapy, vitamin C, D, zinc. There is no strong evidence, but I think we should use it along with the main drugs. So once again, just to summarize, remdesivir CDC recommending, WHO not recommending because the WHO trial was a failed trial. ICMR recommending as an investigational therapy only in hypoxemic patient, preferably moderate category. Convalescent plasma, CDC insufficient evidence, WHO not recommending, ICMR as an investigational therapy, early case, early initial stage, moderate disease, late stage, you won't get any benefit. Steroid, very important drug, hospitalized patient with hypoxemia, all are recommending this drug. Tocilizumab, CDC, progressive disease with less inflammatory marker despite on steroid, WHO not recommending, ICMR not strongly recommending it. And issues is availability and cost. These are two limiting factors. Anticoagulant, all guideline recommending hospitalized patients should receive prophylactic anticoagulant, not the home care patient. Look for contraindication. Convalescent plasma, initial 7 days, it would be effective. You have to measure the titer, different kit having different titer. Avecpron is very important. You don't need to spend money on that. So please advise Avecpron to all patients who are having hypoxemia, even in home care patient, if they require. So this is the change of position. One guideline suggesting 30 minutes to 2 hours every position, like lying prone, right lateral, left lateral, sitting posture. So you should follow it accordingly as per the guideline recommending. The indication is those patients who require FiO2 to more than 28% or on basic respiratory support to achieve SpO2 90%. Basic respiratory support, I mean nasal cannula, simple face mask or venti mask. You should use Avecpron also. This is how we do it. Different position. You can get it in the net in the GOI guideline. This is the position of the pillow over the neck, over the leg, and over the abdomen. Try to keep the chest free. You should take care of the pressure points also. Ask the patient to remain in this position for 30 minutes to 2 hours and then change the position. So these are absolute contraindication. Patient in severe respiratory distress, patient in immediate need for intubation, patient is hemodynamically instable, agitated or altered mental status, patient won't be able to follow your command, unstable spine, thoracic injury, recent abdominal surgery. Relative contraindication, pregnancy second and third trimester, relative contraindication, not absolute contraindication. Thank you very much. So please, if you have any question, you can send in the chat box and I will try to answer. Chat box.
Chat box. क्वेश्चंस लेना है chat box में।